We're live on the Outlaw Radio Show. This is Derek Kennedy with NPR. We are featuring Zach Adams for the speaker of Outlaw Radio Show today. Also featuring
This is terrible.
Vaughn and
This
Nicholas
is terrible.
Monty.
This is great. I love it.
This is terrible.
I'm
Switch it
loving
back
this.
over.
No, we're staying on us for a
No,
second.
we gotta switch it back over. Come on, give me the
Oh, I
camera.
forgot to change it.
Give me the
Oh my
camera.
gosh,
Where are you
this is
going? This is
terrible.
just what's
Oh,
happening.
calm
Hey,
down. It was
hey,
all-
hey. Welcome
we're
to the
all-
Outlaw Radio Show.
We're blaming it all on Derek.
Derek has this nasally NPR voice that he thought he'd bring to the Outlaw Radio Show, and
It's been
and
great.
anyone that
Glad
did want to
be here.
tune in and watch, in that very moment, they were like, "I'm out of here." I want to just from the beginning, I want to say welcome, Pastor Bob. I saw right before we went on that you were watching, and you're my brother. I love you, and I hope you're well. Hope Billy's well. Glad you're watching, fellas. Thank you so much for being on the Outlaw Radio Show with me.
It's great.
It's always a pleasure.
I thought our intro was great. I thought it went very
Introduce
smoothly.
yourself first,
I'm Creighton. I run the computer, more or less.
and the cameras and the switchers and all of those things. And then we got Nicholas Monty,
Nicholas Monty, audience member.
Audience
Not as nervous as Creighton.
audience member, and then we've got awkward
Kennedy.
Derek.
No, not awkward. We are
Awkward
now the
Derek.
head of the NPR introductions for Outlaw Radio.
And now we've transitioned. So where did you get that that voice? Let's do that again. Now that we've given a little context to things.
I don't really remember. I just kind of have heard it like, oh, you are now listening to Late Night NPR, and we will be tuning into your local bands such as Smooth Jazz with piano and cello in the back, and the Dirty Boys Down Under. I don't know.
The Foggy Bottom Boys Down Under. This is a very need I say professional enterprise that we have going on here at the
We're
Outlaw
very
Radio.
serious about everything.
Everything.
Yes.
It's not NPR,
So you boys
it's
doing all right?
BRK.
Y'all doing well?
I'm breathing.
Here and kicking.
Here and kick it. Well, let me explain why they're here. As Creighton mentioned, he kind of runs the live stream. Periodically will join me on the radio show. I haven't mentioned this yet, but what you're watching, Outlaw Radio Live, is the recording of the radio show. So Outlaw Radio is a nationally syndicated radio show. It airs on radio, FM channels around America. Those audio files then are podcasted. You can find our podcast on Apple Podcasting, Spotify, Google, really wherever, whatever you get your podcasting platforms, we're available. You can find us. And so what we do here is this is just the live streaming of the recording of the radio show. This is my radio show. So I'm the predominant voice on the radio. 4 blocks of audio will record. Creighton periodically joins me. Creighton, today you won't be with me just because of the subject matter. I've got so much to jam in.
Cool. That means that I have less to do.
You have less to do today, but periodically, most of the time, Creighton is kind of my sidekick on the show, which is fun. And then Nick and Derek, their job is to hang out, is to listen to the radio show, and then between blocks, at the halfway point, at the end of the show, kind of represent you, the listening audience. So they ask questions, provide feedback, interaction. Nick is always on the Outlaw Radio Show. Nick is a staple of our show, has been for really about 2 months now. And we've just, beginning last week, opened up another chair. And Derek's one of our brothers, and so he's been with us. He'll be with us a lot, but that chair will be filled by someone each week, just kind of adding some variety. But we're glad you're with us, Derek. Thank you so much. Today, I want to talk about eschatology, which is the study of the end, the study of end times, the theology of end times. And fellas, you guys go to Calvary 316, which is the church that I pastor, and we have been in the midst of a series of messages, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, through the book of Revelation, titled Revelation of the King. I will ask very quickly, Nick, can you hit record on these 2 cameras?
Yes, I will.
Can you get up and do that and hit record? We are streaming, but we need to make sure we record for backup purposes.
Like we said, very professional.
Very, very professional. So you guys have been with me in this travel through the book of Revelation, this verse by verse series. The Lord's blessed it, been excited about it. We're just finished chapter 9 this past week. But with everything that's been going on in the world, I wanted to bring in, I want to kind of answer a bigger question about why eschatology matters. A lot of today's episode is going to pull directly from the first series, kind of our introductory series to the book of Revelation. So a lot of this stuff you guys have heard, but at the same time, since you've already heard it, any thoughts, any questions, any feedback, please make sure to contribute. You guys cool?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Anytime I look over there, man, you can jot that over like as we roll. And now he's not going to do it. Watch that. You see that?
Wait, you want me to do it when you look over here?
All right. So we've got 4 blocks of audio. The first block of audio is 14 minutes. And we're going to talk about why eschatology matters. So buckle up. Here we go. Going to roll some music. Get some music rolling in. Creighton, you got it. You can hear it. We're good to go. All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. My name is Zach Adams, and I pastor a church located just outside of Athens, Georgia. The name of the church is Calvary 316. If you're local, let me invite you to come be my guest one Sunday morning. Our service begins promptly at 10:30 a.m. If you're not local, but let's say you're listening on the radio or via our podcast, and you're looking for a good service that you can maybe attend digitally, we live stream our service, again, at 10:30 a.m. every Sunday morning. And you can find our YouTube channel. You can subscribe. You can watch our service live. Calvary316.live is the easiest way to find it. We also stream on Facebook.com/Calvary316. To learn more about the church, if you're interested, visit Calvary316.tv. To access our teaching archive, check out C316.tv. Again, YouTube channel, Calvary316.live. Again, wherever you're listening or however you're listening. If you're listening via one of our wonderful radio partners, or let's say you're listening to the podcast of the episode, every episode of the Outlaw Radio Show is podcasted in its entirety, Apple, Google, Spotify, or maybe you happen to be watching the show. We record the show. We live stream the recording. The easiest way to watch is on our YouTube channel, which is outlawradio.live. Every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, I record the show live. We stream it. Creighton Vaughn is always with me. He's on the show periodically. He's kind of the man behind the live stream. Also joined by a friend of mine, Nick, who is kind of the resident audience member. And then we have another chair where we bring in a different person each week. The last couple weeks, it's been one of our brothers, Derek. And then between blocks of the audio you're listening to, again, whether this is radio or podcast, between these blocks, we have a conversation as a group about what I'm talking about. They share some thoughts, really kind of enhances and seasons the content of what we're trying to accomplish here on Outlaw Radio. Regardless, I do hope you stay with me over the next hour as I seek to deconstruct the negative perception the world has of Christians by boldly discussing today's relevant topics in an honest and genuine way. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. I know over the last few weeks, really over the last year, I mean, good grief, there a lot has been going on culturally. A lot has been going on in our world that has necessitated a show that claims to talk about relevant topics for us to address, from COVID-19 to the election to kind of all points in between. Good grief, we even had a Supreme Court justice pass away and one get nominated and confirmed. All that happened this year. A lot of things happened in 2020. And so here now being in 2021, I want to, the election's behind us. We're still in the midst of this pandemic, but some of those things are shaking. I want to talk about something that is important, and it's the idea of eschatology. If you're not a theologian or not, let's say, up on certain theological terms, eschatology is really just the study of the end of days, the end times, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Great Tribulation, the Battle of Armageddon, the Apocalypse. It's the study of these things that are prophetic within Scripture. You'll find these prophecies dealing with the end all over the Old Testament. You'll find them really emphasized a great deal by the prophet Daniel. You'll find them in the New Testament, yes, spoken of by Jesus extensively in what's known as the Olivet Discourse, which is in 3 of the 4 Gospels. Paul writes about the end times, and specifically 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. He talks about it a bit in 1 Corinthians. Kind of the idea weaves its way through the New Testament, but then becomes an emphasis of the book of Revelation. Now, if you are attending a church, so recently, I know this because recently I started a series through the book of Revelation. I titled it Revelation of the King, which I'm going to explain a little bit more towards the end of today's episode. I know that if you hear someone say, we're going to do a verse by verse, chapter by chapter Bible study going through the book of Revelation, your initial reaction, for a lot of people, it's not going to be really exciting. In fact, I was talking to, we were at a kid's birthday party. I was talking to like one of the aunts of the kids and inviting her to church. And she was like, oh, well, what are you going through? And I was like, we're going through the book of Revelation. She was like, yeah, I'm out. Just let me know when you're done and I'll come to church. For a lot of people, it's a big turnoff, which I'll get into in a minute. There are some people though, at least culturally within Christian circles, that get really geeked up for a study of the book of Revelation. And they get geeked up for really like one of 3 reasons. One, they're kind of weird. I put these people into the category of like they're Alex Jones fans. They love global conspiracies. And so they're just kind of weird. And in regards to the book of Revelation, this just kind of hits where they're at. If you're excited about the study of end times, maybe you were also like homeschooled or like really isolated from the world growing up. And if you're unsure if you're that person, if you have at home a complete collection of all 16 Left Behind books and Kirk Cameron is your favorite actor, you fit into this category. I'm not throwing shade. I'm not hating on you. I'm just saying that it's just kind of a category of people. There are other people that get geeked up on the book of Revelation because they're just kind of morbid. Like they love death and destruction and zombies and the apocalypse. They just kind of really enjoy that particular subject matter. The truth, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say this, is that most people, the majority of people in today's society, today's culture, even our Christian culture, aren't excited about any series dealing with the book of Revelation or just even the topic in general. And if that's you listening, don't worry, because I'm in a lot of ways, right there with you. If you had told me over a year ago that following a series that I was doing presently through the book of Leviticus, that at some point in 2020, I would be doing a verse-by-verse study in the book of Revelation, I would have thought at the time that you were completely off your rockers. Now, let me explain kind of my background with the book of Revelation, because I think it's important. So my first experience with the book of Revelation goes all the way back to 1993. And I know that sounds like a introduction to a really terrible John Mayer song, but that's the truth. I was 10 years old. And for whatever reason, I had to spend an evening at the church with my dad, who was a pastor. He was pastoring a Calvary Chapel, the church he still pastors today, which was located in a little building off of 2nd Street, right in the heart of downtown Stone Mountain, Georgia. Now, my dad sensed that I was bored, and so he suggested, while he was taking care of it, and I don't know what he was taking care of, but while he was doing his thing, he suggested I sit in the secretary's office and read my Bible. Again, I'm 10, I can read my Bible. He'd finish up some meetings, we'd go home. Now, I didn't know what to do, what to read, where to begin. So what did I do? I landed on the revelation of Jesus Christ, the book of Revelation. I probably landed on the book of Revelation after a few minutes of playing Bible roulette. And if you don't know what Bible roulette is you close your eyes and you just kind of thumb through and you put your finger down, you start reading. And that's really never a good idea. I decided I'd read the book of Revelation. Now, keep in mind, I'm in the 4th grade. I have a decent level of reading comprehension. In retrospect, kind of with its PG-13 rating, the book of Revelation was not a good place for a 10-year-old to start reading the Bible on his own. So, as you can imagine, roughly an hour or so later, my dad comes into the office with briefcase in tow, telling me, "Zach, it's time to head home." I didn't answer. And he found me hiding under Miss Judy's desk, crying. I was in tears. And my dad was like, "Zach, what's wrong?" And I replied, "Dad, I'm scared. The world's going to end. A quarter of the world's population is going to die." I hadn't gotten to some of the later judgments where another third dies. All the vegetation, Dad's going to get burned up. All the seas are going to turn to blood. All the fish are going to die. There's going to be no fresh water to drink. Dad, war's coming. The Antichrist is going to behead anyone who doesn't take the mark of the beast. Heavy, again, for a 10-year-old. So my dad looked at me kind of rather perplexed, and he was like, "Zach, what have you been reading?" And I replied, "Dad, I've been reading the book of Revelation." Now, at this point, my dad calmly kind of helped me out from under the desk. We turned off the lights. We locked the front door. We loaded up in his 85 Corolla, and we made our way home. And as we were doing so, he explained to me that, yes, while all of the things I mentioned were going to happen, that Jesus was going to rapture the church home to heaven first. It's as though Zach, he said, "Zach, because you've given your life to Jesus, you won't be here to experience any of these terrible things." Now, to be honest, and again, I'm just going to be brutally honest here, though I took solace in that reality that night as I tried to fall asleep, I'm still completely and utterly freaked out. Like, I didn't understand why God would have to judge the world in such a way. I didn't have my theology fully worked out. I was worried, again, by those who would be left behind. What would happen to my dog? In fact, as I considered these things, I decided at that moment that I needed at least one friend that wasn't a Christian, thinking that I needed someone that isn't going to be raptured, who could come over and let my dog out of the house so she wouldn't starve to death. Again, I'm 10, kind of processing all of these things. And aside from that, and you're unlikely to hear a pastor make such a confession, but I know some of you understand what I'm saying. I remember even in that moment and some of the years to come praying, not that the rapture wouldn't happen, but wouldn't happen now. Like, yeah, I love Jesus. Heaven sounded great, sounded cooler than hell, no pun intended. But like, I wanted Jesus to maybe like wait so I could live and experience a little bit of life. I mean, can you relate to that? Now, my second significant experience with the book of Revelation came as a 16-year-old. So about 6 years after this, 1999 was about to give way to 2000. As Prince said, everyone was getting ready for that party, right? We're going to party like we're going into 2000, this new millennium. And if you recall, the entire world was really geeked up, concerned, freaked out over Y2K. You know, Y2K was this idea that all the computer systems that controlled everything, from banking to air travel to like the nuclear arsenal, was going to crash the very moment the internal time sequences flipped to 00, 2000. Now, to make the entire situation more stressful, prominent church leaders were warning. Biblical prophecy indicated that our New Year's Eve parties might very well end with the rapture. That kind of freaked me out a little. Now, yeah, you're supposed to be excited about this. But again, I remember asking Jesus, like, I want you to come back, but could you wait, till I can get married? Because again, I'm a 16-year-old chaste Christian who, regarding certain experiences in life, would have maybe enjoyed experiencing those things in the bond of marriage before the rapture. Like, again, as a 16-year-old, Y2K, 2000, the world's going to end. What's going on? Now, clearly, my prayers were answered because Y2K came and left without incident. The church wasn't raptured to heaven when the clock struck midnight. But even then, as a believer, sensing and seeing how the world was so worked up about Y2K, I just thought to myself, man, like, Christians look ridiculous. Like, we look silly getting worked up about these things. And I blamed it in the moment, and I will say wrongly, but I blamed it on the church's obsession with the book of Revelation. Now when we come back from a quick break, I want to kind of round out, because again, my understanding of the book of Revelation wasn't limited to a 10-year-old perspective or 16-year-old perspective. I would come to gain a greater understanding of the book, but I want to place all of this stuff into a cultural context, and in the end, hope to paint a mosaic by which you understand why I believe the study of eschatology, the study of the book of Revelation, is more important today than maybe it has ever been. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Outlaw Radio Show.
So I was way off. Like, I didn't agree with your, like, I was praying that the rapture wouldn't happen quite yet until the very end of that. Then I was like, oh yeah, I get that.
Right.
I was in your same shoes when I was about 12 to 14 years old, 15, 16 years old, all those. I was like, I want it, but not yet. I have too much to live. I got too much to do.
And you can understand it here. You can understand it here. Like, of course, especially in the midst of this pandemic and everything we're going through, like, come Lord Jesus, come, right? What's interesting is, by the way, when you have kids, you start actively praying for the rapture to happen soon. like when it's just you and your wife, you're like, this is great. I could enjoy this for a few more years. You add a few kids to it, and it's like, I come in and Jessica's like, Jesus, please come quickly. So, I think the longer you live life, again, you turn 30, your body starts falling apart and you start getting fat and slow and you start aching. I think life, the more you live, gives you a different sense of these things. But yeah, I think a lot of us had that particular sensibility. Derek, what about you? Because you also grew up in the same kind of background, same kind of Christian culture.
Yeah, when you were talking about there's three different types of people who do like the Revelations. I was like, man, no. When you said that we were going to be going over this, I was super excited. But I mean, I don't really like Alex Jones all that much, but I was homeschooled. Don't really care about death all that much. But I was like, no, I was kind of genuinely excited. I like diving into it and reading into it because I learn more and more through every single study that I go through.
So did you read the Left Behind books?
I think I read like 2, like for the first 2. They had them at the church we were going to at the time in the library, but
I actually fit into the category, for full disclosure. I wasn't a homeschooler, but I read, I think, the first 8 Left Behind books. And then like at some point in the middle of that series, like they did 3 books that covered like 3 days. And I'm like, yeah, I'm out. Like this is, like, I enjoy reading and don't mind the subject matter. But like, even as like probably a 17-year-old, I was like, man, like they're blatantly milking this for a few bucks. And
I'm like 90% sure that being a pastor's kid and being homeschooled are at the very least congruent. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Now, the missionary kids, that's a whole third category.
Well, missionary kids are homeschooled.
So let me ask, just in the context of by which I was saying what I was saying, do you presently pray against the rapture?
No.
You're like, I'm single. I'd like to enjoy some life, God. Or you're like, no, I'm good. I'm good going home.
I mean, I'm down for whatever, but I'd rather be in the sky than here.
All right, good feedback, fellas. That was good. We jumped in there right on. Let's dive back in. Next block's 12 minutes. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. The thesis of today's episode is that I believe eschatology, or the study of end times, the book of Revelation, is more pertinent, more relevant than maybe at any point. You know, over the last 20 years, I have personally studied the book of Revelation in great detail. I've taken a collegiate class on the book. I have a degree in theology. I might have slept through most of it, but I still have that degree. I've read several of the most comprehensive commentaries, most respected commentaries on the book. I've listened to a dozen expositions through the book of Revelation. I've even taught the book a couple times as a youth pastor. I'm doing presently a verse-by-verse study at Calvary 316. So I've studied the book, and while I've come to greatly appreciate the book of Revelation, like my greatest hesitation has always been regarding teaching it from the pulpit, is that I feel like the book has been used and abused to address cultural issues, real cultural issues, just really poorly. And as a result of the way that the book has been used by evangelicals in the last 20, 30 years, one of my hesitations about the book of Revelation is I believe it's kind of been distorted from the purpose itself, and in turn has kind of fostered this perception that Christians are kind of tin-foiled hat-wearing escapists. And I want to correct that misconception. Now, in order to explain what I mean, and in doing so, I hope to establish why I believe it's important to study the book, while also demonstrating how I think my approach has been different. I want to unpack, and you got to kind of roll with me here, but I want to unpack the very interesting and complex history of American culture and its unique relationship with the book of Revelation. Now, I know our world seems chaotic, and like who knows what the next 9 years of this decade holds. But let's be real. The 1960s proved to be one of the most difficult 10-year stretches in American history. First, the military was quagmired in Vietnam, which gave rise to the anti-war movement. While Bob Dylan sang in protest, Muhammad Ali sat in a cell over his refusal to be drafted. Thousands would take to the streets to make their voices heard in protest. Aside from this, racial tensions were at the forefront of the national consciousness. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed, expanding voting rights, ending discrimination in the workplace, forcing schools to desegregate. Sadly, these deep-seated cultural divisions between races were not helped. They were not aided. You had the reversed racism of the Black Power movement. You had the assassinations later of MLK and Malcolm X. You know, in spite of the progress, the 60s saw increases in violence, riots, cities burned. There was an explosion of crime in urban communities. And while all of these things were taking place, the culture itself was also experiencing nothing shy of revolutionary times. Disillusioned with the status quo, high school and college-age kids were breaking from the norms, breaking from long-held traditions of their parents. You know, the black and white world of the 1950s transformed literally into a kaleidoscope of color in the 60s. Cotton trousers were exchanged for polyester bell-bottoms. Leave It to Beaver for I Dream of Jeannie. With Elvis busy attempting to make a career in film, America changed on February 7th, 1964, when Beatlemania officially swept the country. From there in 66, Hendrix shared a stage with Cream. By the late 60s, Pink Floyd, Jefferson Airplane, and the Grateful Dead had taken psychedelic rock mainstream. Along with the music came an explosion in drug use, which ultimately led to a sexual revolution that exchanged monogamy for the perversion of free love. And in the midst of a culture in flux, you had this growing confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. I mean, that was an inescapable part of everyone's life. I mean, both of these superpowers were rapidly developing their nuclear stockpiles, all while attempting to expand their strategic alliances and ideologies around the globe. The space race dominated politics, consumed national budgets, creating an explosion in debt. In 1961, the USSR successfully put the first man in space. Only 8 years later, in 1969, the United States planted our flag on the moon. In October of 1962, a missile crisis 90 miles off the coast of Florida brought the world to the brink of a full-scale nuclear disaster. With the communists now in Cuba, basements were converted into bomb shelters. Food was stockpiled and gas masks procured. Fire drills in school were exchanged for duck and cover simulations. Like in the end, the assassinations of JFK in 1963 and his brother Bobby in 1968 only heightened our sense of this growing communist threat and exacerbated many of the national concerns with the establishment in D.C. As America transitioned from the 60s to the 70s, there was no question people were truly worried about the future and concerned about everything, where everything was rapidly heading. Like cities were ablaze by countercultural groups rebelling against the establishment. In fact, between January of 1969 and April of 1970, America sustained 4,330 bombings that resulted in 43 deaths. Racial tensions were red hot. Societal norms had been flipped upside down. Faith in our institutions and the ruling class would be further diminished when on August 9th, 1974, President Richard Nixon was forced to resign from the office as a result of the Watergate scandal. By the end of the decade, the country would be facing gas shortages, double-digit inflation, and a hostage crisis where 52 Americans were held in Iran for 444 long days. You know, the simple truth is while the media may have celebrated Woodstock in 1969, this cultural and sexual revolution had left a generation of hippies burned out, drugged up, and empty. Like over the course of a 10-month period, amazingly, between 1970 and 1971, rock heroes Hendrix, Joplin, Wilson, and Morrison were all dead from drug overdoses. And to make it all worse, on top of everything else, there was this daunting fear that World War III could break out at any moment. And it's with this backdrop in mind that something interesting took place within the American Christian church, grappling with how to reach such a culture. Again, the fundamental question, cultural question on everyone's mind coming into the 70s and all throughout the 80s centered on an uncertain future. What was the world coming to? Was the world going to come to an end? What if I die? Yeah, as we turn the page on the 60s, in 1970, Christian book publisher, Zondervan, took a chance on a campus crusade for Christ evangelist by the name of Hal Lindsey, who published his first nonfiction titled The Late Great Planet Earth. Having spent a large portion of the 60s ministering to students at Berkeley and UCLA, Lindsey was convinced that young people were hungry for a biblical understanding of the end times. He felt it was relevant, and he was right. The cultural appetite was enormous. According to an article written in the National Endowment for the Humanities titled The Late Great Planet Earth Made Apocalypse a Popular Concern, columnist Aaron Smith notes how people gravitated to this book, writing, quote, "In order to reconcile disturbing events in the news with predictions made in prophetic books of the Bible, The Late Great Planet Earth made it appear that the world was completely under God's control and history was unfolding exactly as God intended. Readers were told that they had a special role in convincing others of the truth so they could accept Jesus as their savior in time to be rescued from the impending apocalypse." Like, the book was so successful, the New York Times says, quote, "The Late Great Planet Earth was the best nonfiction book of the entire 1970s. Today, it's sold over 35 million copies." Because of the cultural interest concerning the end times, in light of the things taking place in the world, beginning with Hal Lindsey, the 70s and 80s would see an explosion of Christian books and expositions dealing with the book of Revelation. In 1976, Pastor Chuck Smith of Calvary Chapel would write a book on the rapture titled Snatched Away. In 1977, he then published Revelation Commentary, What the World is Coming to. A year later, in 1978, Smith wrote a bestseller, End Times, a report on future survival. I mean, everyone was captivated with Sunday sermons and Revelation drawing huge crowds. I mean, Christians were more interested in the rapture and the study of eschatology than ever before. But it wasn't just Christians. Like, the world was also interested. In fact, this phenomenon is perfectly illustrated in the reality that most of the gospel tracts during this time period centered almost entirely on selling the idea that accepting Jesus' salvation would ensure you go to heaven and not hell, that you might be raptured so you could escape the end of the world in the apocalypse. What's interesting about all of this is that by the mid-1990s, the cultural climate in America had changed, hadn't it? Like, the Cold War was now over, and no one was fearing a nuclear winter. Peace and security were felt at home. Racial tensions had largely dissipated. There were no longer riots in the streets, largely. The economy was booming. In fact, the cultural grunge movement had become so intertwined with commercialism that it manifested very little societal change. Because no one was concerned about the future of the world in the 90s, which seemed secure, and were instead consumed with how to get the most out of life today, Christianity also pivoted. So you got to keep that in mind. The 60s, the 70s, what was happening culturally drove people to this concern, this consideration of the end times. How is this going to play out? What is this all about? What happens to me when I die? The culture was driving the interest and made the book of Revelations very relevant, which made it popular. Things changed in the 90s, which is why you see a pivot in Christianity. Now, when we come back here with the Outlaw Radio Show, we're going to pick that up. I'm going to explain a little bit of that more. Contact information, check out our website, outlawradio.org. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Anything, fellas?
I think Pastor Bob, he echoed the same sentiment. He posted another comment. I know that you're not looking at that right now.
Great.
Yeah. He posted another comment. He echoed that idea. He said, being 75, I'm ready now. But when God is ready for me and his church, which I think is a very good way of putting it. Like, when God is ready, I'm ready.
Let me say this. I'm going to say this to Pastor Bob, but I'm going to say this to everyone else that might be in their retirement years. Abraham left Ur of the Chaldeans very late in life. Moses was called to free the people. He was 80. Like, if you run down the list of Old Testament saints, you'll keep coming back to an idea that God can use you even when the world doesn't think you're all that useful anymore. Like, in fact, that you have this wealth of knowledge and information and experience that younger Christians need. You know, if you're an older person and you're looking at Christianity and everybody that's popular is young and there's this movement to youth, like, don't buy the lie that you're not important. You know what I mean? I think, fellas, I think that's important. It's one of the things I love about Calvary 316 is that God has kind of brought this wonderful balance. Like, we have a lot of youth, and youth come with exuberance, but no experience. But he's coupled that with some seasoned siblings that have all the experience and no energy. So it's a wonderful marriage. It's people that are very energetic, no experience, and people with very little energy and lots of experience. And it's a wonderful blending. And that's what I love about our church. What do you guys think?
For sure.
Yeah, that's why we have Joe and Larry on the elders board.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And Chad, he's also very old.
He's like 2 years older than you.
He's in his 40s.
He's like 2 years older than you.
He's going downhill in a hurry.
Just to put that in perspective, don't forget, when you were reading Revelation under the secretary desk, I was being born.
Brother, gosh. All right, let's pick this back up.
That's legitimate. We're legitimately 10 years apart.
Well, I got a question.
Okay, you got a question.
Yeah. Do you think the only disconnect with people studying the end times and eschatology is just what's going on in the world? Or do you think there's more to it than that?
That's a great question.
I know circumstance drives all thoughts and everything, so I didn't know.
Again, I think the book of Revelation has fallen out of vogue because of cultural things. I don't think that minimizes the need to study it, but I think in a lot of ways it's gotten a bad rap, which is why people have kind of minimized it and downplayed it. And in fact, that really does kind of set the stage for the next block.
That's what I figured, that you were going to set it up for next block. So.
Yeah, let's dive into the next block. And I think
you'll probably,
if I don't answer that, let's build back on it.
Okay.
We got 11 minutes and I got a lot to cover. So we're going to rock and roll. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. So why has the book of Revelation and the study of the end times and eschatology largely fallen out of favor? I mean, you go back to the 60s, the 70s, even into the 80s. I mean, it was any book written on the book of Revelation was a #1 seller. Sermon series, the churches were packed out. And again, it was related to things going on in the culture. You saw it in the way that Bible tracts were crafted. Give your life to Jesus, be raptured, escape the apocalypse. Again, it's a selling point when you think the end of the world is near. But you get into the 90s, and a lot of the things within the culture pertinent in the 60s and 70s had changed. Like, no one was concerned in the 90s about the future of the world. The Cold War was over. Like, geopolitics, things kind of seemed secure. Like, instead, in the 90s, people were mostly concerned with, like, how do I get the most out of today? And you see this reflected in cultural Christianity. What began to sell? In 2000, Monmouth Books released Bruce Wilkinson's The Prayer of Jabez, Breaking Through to the Blessed Life. Not to be outdone, in 2002, Zondervan took another chance on an unknown California pastor named Rick Warren. They published The Purpose-Driven Life. The Purpose-Driven Life quickly became a #1 bestseller, topping the New York Times list. Since then, I mean, you just go to the Christian bookstore and you'll see this, or go to Amazon Books, you'll see it. Self-help books have topped the Christian charts, and seeker-friendly churches have become the trend. Like, over the last decade plus, very few churches have even mentioned biblical prophecy, yet alone spend any time on it from the pulpit. You don't see studies on the book of Revelation all that much. Like, even evangelical tracts pivoted. Like, they were no longer focused on your future destiny, but they were focused on how accepting Jesus will improve your present life. It was no longer about eternity, but the moment. Yeah, as one can imagine, with such a shift in interest. Books on the end times were no longer vogue. Sermon series on the book of Revelation, few and far between. So I get back to the original question, like, why do I believe that eschatology matters today? Because, I do. And I think it's changed. I think we've seen a cultural change, again, in the course of the last year, maybe two. Like, in fact, I want to make the argument that the events over the last 10 to 12 months have created another dramatic shift in the things that people are concerned about, Christians and non-Christians alike. I mean, think about it for just a minute. Like the 60s, there's a lot of similarities. Like the 60s, the future of our coming decade is really uncertain, isn't it? Like today, right now, what are people worried about? Well, they're worried about the future, aren't they? People right now are worried about our jobs, what's going to happen in the economy. People are worried about health and this pandemic. People are worried about our children and their education and safety. Antifa revolutionaries are again rioting in the streets. For months, they've been setting fires to cities. Those on the far right stormed the Capitol building. Like, while everyone can agree that there's room for improved policing, we have seen kind of this reversed racism of BLM. Left-wing groups pointing to white fragility as kind of the core ill of our society. We have a new administration in the White House pointing to these things, saying that it's white privilege that's restricting any type of meaningful progress. Equality has somehow been exchanged for equity. People don't like, and it's not really good for societal harmony. People don't like when their children are being called racist simply because they were born with a certain skin color. Culturally, there are forces right now seeking to transform our norms again, like in the 60s, through a new type of sexual revolution. Like, for the first time in history, one's gender can be fluid. As fluid as one's sexual orientation. Unless, by the way, you happen to identify as gay, and then it's impossible for you to ever change. I still haven't figured that one out. It's just a few months ago. The largest state in the union, Californication, legalized pedophilia. Like, according to a law passed by the Democratic legislature and quickly signed into law by Gavin Newsom, as long as the sexual interaction is homosexual and occurs between a child and adult no more than 10 years their senior, it's completely legal. It's crazy. And just wait, polyamory, where 3 or more consenting adults want to marry, that's going to be the next civil rights issue of our time. Like, there's no question we are experiencing like this cultural rot unseen in our country. I mean, the number one song of this past year, according to Billboard, was a song by Cardi B I can't even mention. It's only titled by initials. It's grotesque. Like, not only does the song objectify women, but the sexual content in the lyrics is so graphic and perverse that there's literally no part of the song I could quote. Like, it's completely depraved. And to add injury to insult, this is the same Cardi B who was granted more interviews with the presidential candidate Joe Biden than the largest news network on the planet, Fox News. And then you've got Netflix and their movie Cute Cuties, like, created for the sex offenders list. Just gross. As I relay the things that are weighing on our hearts, I haven't even mentioned? I haven't mentioned a global pandemic, the one we're in the midst of. Cases began emerging in Wuhan late 2019, but since then, COVID-19 has spread around the globe. It's wrecked the economy. It's disproportionately targeted the most vulnerable, the elderly. Like, worldwide right now, 100 million people have been infected, with roughly 2.16 million people dying in 10 months. as we all seek to make the best decisions for ourselves and our families, the grand struggle in all of this is what to believe. Who do you trust? How deadly is COVID? Do we really believe the numbers? Where did it originate? Is a vaccine reliable? Does the disease affect our kids or not? I thought one mask worked. Now I'm being told 2 or 3 is better. To compound matters, the media lies, the WHO is corrupt, our elected politicians are partisan, our local leaders are drunk on power, illogic is everywhere, protesting is happening in the streets, shopping at Walmart, both completely safe, but somehow going to church is dangerous. Most alarmingly, many of our fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Constitution have been set aside under this guise of a public health emergency. It's craziness. The CDC guidelines are ever changing. Remember 15 days to flatten the curve? It'll be like 15 months to flatten the curve. At one point, you don't need to wear a mask because they don't work, but now you need to wear a mask or you'll kill grandma. It's masking up to get to your seat in a restaurant is absolutely necessary, but don't worry, once you sit down, you can take your mask off because COVID doesn't affect people while they eat. What? Like it's just insanity. It might be true that the USSR is no longer a geopolitical threat. But I mean, people are thinking about communist China, right? What was their role in the spread of the disease? Did they manufacture it? Was it accidentally released from a lab? Did it come naturally from a wet market? Could the CCP have done more to stop the pandemic? Did they choose intentionally not to do anything? What does this mean for U.S.-Chinese relations? Could there be a conflict viewing? Will there be another arms race? Like, let's be real. Where we sit today, culturally, people are afraid and we're worried about the future. Like, there is a national uneasiness to where everything is headed. You can feel it. It's palpable. Can we trust the results of the last elections? Did Biden really win 80 million votes? If that's true, is America really embracing socialism? And then you have cancel culture running amok. People are being deplatformed and their livelihoods ruined. A former president's been removed from all social media. And now as a private citizen is being impeached. Amazon Web Services ghosted Parler. Even now, they're trying to destroy the MyPillow guy. Yeah, Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, for the audacity of sharing a political belief shared by 74 million people. Like, for the first time in my life, our present lives have become so uncertain, people are once again concerned about the future. Where are these things headed? Where's my place in it? As Christians, it's only natural that when everything seems out of control, you begin to wonder about God's sovereign control. Is God off the job? Where is he? And it's in those moments, these type of cultural movements, that the book of Revelation is of such vital importance, because it not only tells us the future, but it tells us the one who holds the future in his hand. We're going to come back to that thought. I'd love to hear from you, the listening audience. Again, outlawradio.org is where you can find all of our contact information. You can email us at info@outlawradio.org, facebook.com/The Radio Outlaw. You can watch the show live, recorded live every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Our YouTube channel is outlawradio.live. We also stream on Facebook. Every episode of the Outlaw Radio Show is podcasted in its entirety, Apple, Google, and Spotify. Again, I mentioned all of this stuff can be found at outlawradio.org. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I mean, other than that, it's been a really nice couple of years.
I mean, yeah, when you put it like that, I'm really hopeful.
Just a few minute details.
That's the thing.
about
There's just so much that's going on. I think for me personally, it's just overwhelming. I'm like, okay, why would I even get involved? It just seems like there's no hope. Like, I know God is sovereign and he's in control. So that's why I'm like, all right, well, I am not going to get involved with it because there's nothing that I feel I can do.
This is why, though, for, when we were in 2019, going verse by verse through Leviticus, right? Like, if you had told me that we would be in the book of Revelation a year from then, I would have not believed you, because I thought there nothing could happen where I would feel inclined to take the church to the book of Revelation. I felt like, let's transition to the book of Daniel, because that that really dovetailed from the last few chapters of Leviticus and some of the warnings laid out by God that Daniel was experiencing. But that's why we're going through it as a church. I mean, when you look at the culture and everything that's going on, I think it's relevant. I think it's important. I think it's helpful. So.
Yeah, I remember when we were going to go through Daniel.
Yeah, I remember talking about it too.
Yeah, we did most of the book of Daniel live stream, which is crazy. But.
Oh man.
No, I mean Revelation is extremely relevant now. I mean, you look at it, everything, and
I think I've done it in a very relevant way. I think our approach has been we've kept the main thing, which is a good segue. Let's finish it out and we'll talk a little bit more because I'm going to explain why I think the book of Revelation is so important. 9:45. You guys good with that?
Sounds good.
Good to go.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. I'm talking about eschatology and trying to build the argument of why I feel eschatology is so relevant. Now, you need to understand that back in the 70s and 80s, while the book of Revelation was the correct place to turn and the context of what was happening in the world, sadly, though, I believe that the way the book was used by evangelicals was misguided. Like, take, for example, Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth. You know, instead of presenting the gospel message of redemption from sin and the incredible transformation of the individual yielded through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, the doctrine of salvation ended up being marketed as a golden ticket that would grant you to the great Willy Wonka factory in the sky. Like, what's a shame, and one reason that eschatology has developed a bad rap, is that the approach to reaching a culture that's genuinely afraid of the future was to use the book of Revelation to actually stoke those fears. Like, for years, the common refrain from pulpits across America was not that not only their fears were justified, but that they needed to be afraid. Like, the world was headed towards a reckoning. The Antichrist was at work. World War III was coming. Like, the good news, or what we would call the gospel during this season, was the glorious truth that Jesus wanted to change your life. Wasn't the fact that Jesus wanted to change your life, but that he could save you from the great tribulation. You see, in the end, Jesus' salvation was kind of billed as your way out, an escape from Armageddon, your way to heaven the very moment things got bad on earth. Again, it led to this idea of escapism. Like, Jesus was presented as a savior, but a savior from the coming apocalypse, not a savior from sin. Like, during this time, evangelical tracts coined popular phrases like get right or get left, or turn or burn. Like, logically, for such a pitch to land, urgency was necessary. To foster this sense of urgency for people to accept Jesus, pastors would take the current events of the day and read them into the Revelation narrative. Like, the entire point was to show how the end times was coming quicker than anyone might realize, and you didn't want to miss the rapture. You know, even today, churches born in this period still do these type of prophecy updates where pastors theorize and speculate and bloviate as to where we stand on current things. You know, tragically, in more extreme cases, in order to gin up urgency, the urgency of choosing Jesus, pastors would fall into the trap of date setting actual times when Jesus was going to be coming back. The rapture would happen in 1981. When it didn't happen in 81, people were given 88 reasons why the rapture would happen in 88. When that prediction failed, new calculations were made. The rapture would happen with Y2K in the year 2000. But aside from the fact that prophecy updates and date setting using the book of Revelation made Christians look really foolish, it was during these years that the church had become so heavenly minded that we were no longer of any earthly use. You know, like, one of the criticisms with the Christian community that studied the book of Revelation and believed in the rapture was that this church, the church that focused on these things, were obsessed, had become so obsessive with leaving Earth that they had lost sight of their mission to planet Earth. But, like, here's my point. In light of what's happening in our world, like, I believe the book of Revelation is more relevant than ever as long as you present it the way and you understand it the way that God intended. Yes, it is a book that addresses the future. And sure, it's brutally honest as to the trajectory of where all of these things lead and where our world will end. Like, and there's no doubt it can be scary at times. But you need to remember the future is revealed in this book, it's revealed in prophecy for one reason. So that you might come to see Jesus in a new and radical way. Like, it's not an accident that the book of Revelation begins by literally declaring itself as, quote, the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's the unveiling of Jesus, the revelation of Jesus. Yeah, I'm convinced that what our culture needs most in these trying and difficult times, it's not a message of escapism, escaping a coming tribulation. And once more, it's totally inappropriate to use the book of Revelation to stoke people's fears, to conjure up more things to be afraid of, hoping that it motivates people to act. The gospel message of Jesus is not based on escapism, nor is it fatalistic. Like, using the book of Revelation to make grand predictions as to how or when future events might happen isn't helpful. Like, to use foxnews.com as a cipher by which you can understand prophecy, it's silly. Like, are we closer to the end times than at any other point in history? Sure. And guess what? Tomorrow will be even closer. It's how time works. Jesus was clear that no man knows the day or the hour, so it's wrong for us to speculate. You see, I want to encourage you, if you're a listener to the Outlaw radio show, in the midst of everything that's going on in this world, go to the book of Revelation. Yes, you will gain an insight into the end. We have nothing to fear. Yes, things seem out of control, but they very much remain under God's sovereign hand. Yes, you can go to prophecy and understand the end, but the purpose is to get a greater insight into the one who holds the end in his hands. Yes, it's to know the end, but it's knowing about the one who knows the end, the one who controls the end. Yeah, there's a lot of wickedness and injustice and terrible things in our world right now, but a reckoning will come. Like, time is short. Our purpose is not to leave planet Earth, but to see those who live on the planet come into a relationship with Jesus. The book of Revelation isn't to make you scared. It's not to freak you out. It's not to worry you. The book of Revelation, a greater understanding of the end, is to help you come to know who Jesus is a little bit more than you did ahead of time. It's why, with the study that I'm doing right now at Calvary 316, Revelation of the King, that's the theme. It's the revelation of Jesus, the King, the Christ. Everything about seeing the end is to reveal more about Jesus. I present it as the fifth gospel, that we get this like half the perspective. We get a glimpse into who Jesus is. He's a lamb, as though he's been led to the slaughter, but the book of Revelation lets us know that he's a king. He's triumphal. Yes, he rode a donkey, but the day will come that he'll enter Jerusalem riding white stallion. Yes, he will bear a crown of thorns, but on the flip side to it, he will have a golden crown and a scepter. He laid down his life as a suffering servant, but he will come back to rule and reign as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Like, you need to know more about Jesus, who he is. In eschatology, the study of the end, not only does it help place the moment into a particular context, but it helps you see Jesus more clearly. Yeah, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. It took me a long time in high school to realize that the even-numbered answers to the questions in my math book, that those answers were provided in the back. Like, so in your math textbook, you'd have these problems, but the answers to the even numbers are in the back. And the idea is that if you have the answer to the problem, it can help you deconstruct the problem, make more sense of the problem. When you have the solution, the problem gains clarity. And we are dealing with a lot of problems. The ultimate solution to it all is Jesus Christ. And that's what the book of Revelation reveals. And when you see Jesus, and then you plug him into your problem and what's going on in the world, things gain a new measure of clarity, a bit more understanding. Eschatology is more important than ever for all the cultural reasons I mentioned. We all need a fresh revelation of the King. You've been listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. If you like what you heard, I want to encourage you to contact your local Christian radio station. Thank them that they're carrying Outlaw Radio in your community. If you're listening on the radio, check out our podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you're listening on the radio or the podcast, check out the live recording of the show Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is outlawradio.live. You can also watch facebook.com/The Radio Outlaw. We'd love to hear from you, the listening audience. Questions, comments, testimonials, critiques. The more the merrier. Check us out, outlawradio.org. All the information's there. Once again, my name is Zach Adams, and I hope you join me this time next week for more of the Outlaw Radio Show.
So I think I answered my question about earlier.
You answered your question?
Yeah, in my own head.
Okay, so answer the question.
So the question pretty much was, is what's surrounding culture wanting to drive us studying the book of Revelation or eschatology? And the answer is yes, it is. I think that's the only reason, because I compared it to a non-believer getting saved. Why is a non-believer going to get saved? Because he now realizes he's a sinner and needs forgiveness and needs something to look for, so he finds Jesus. Well, what are people scared of? The future. So what do they have to look for? Is Revelation.
Like, I agree with that entirely. The one point I would come back to is that when you understand the book of Revelation, it's relevant regardless of what's going on in culture. Culture will drive certain trends and needs and what's necessary, much the same way that like whatever's going on in your life will do the same. When you're going through good seasons of life, a lot of the passages dealing with storms and trials and tribulation, while you understand intellectually, and it's important to know, don't carry the same type of weight. Like you're not doing your devotionals in Job. But when life hits a rough patch, again, the context of life does provide a certain context for the scriptures and for how these things hit us in a moment. That being said, again, if you understand that the book of Revelation is a fifth gospel, it's always relevant regardless of circumstance, because it's how we get to know, like without the book of Revelation, imagine how the Bible would read without the book of Revelation. The last book of the Bible would be Jude. Who talks about angels being held in their proper abode awaiting the day of judgment. I mean, it would end with this great ... Like, what? Like, think about how limited your understanding of Jesus would be without the book of Revelation. I mean, the last you would have seen of Jesus. That's a good trivia question. Last you would have seen of Jesus would have been what?
He died and came back.
No. Saul is after that. I think Saul on the road to Damascus.
Bingo.
Is it? Okay.
So you'd have the ascension of Jesus, which again, as far as like the earth goes, would be, I mean, you're right in that context. The next time would be the stoning of Stephen, where we see Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father.
Oh yeah.
But then it would be, I mean, the next recorded words of Jesus, would be, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It's hard to kick against the goads. If you didn't have the book of Revelation, that's the last you see of Jesus, which wouldn't have been
a complete picture.
Would have been a little strange, right? I mean, it would have again, it's the book of Revelation is always relevant regardless of whatever you're going through, because without it, you don't actually know who your Savior is. You don't know who your King is. Yes, he's going to return in glory. He said he would, but you don't know what that looks like. You don't understand it all. Like, there's a context that, again, I agree with you with what you're saying. Cultural things will always drive us.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like bad things are going on in the world. We can point to Revelation. I'm a sinner. I feel like crap. We can point to Jesus. That's where my point is.
Yeah.
Like, it pretty much.
I would tell everyone, you should always at some point, if you're giving your life to Jesus, you should read the 5 Gospels. You should look at Matthew, who presents him as the King of the Jews. You should look at Mark, which presents him as the servant. You should look at Luke, the ultimate man, and John, the Son of God. But then you should also study the book of Revelation, which present him as the triumphal king of the world, not just the king of the Jews.
Right. With the 4 gospels, you get the lamb. With Revelation, you get the lion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Presented also as the lamb. So there's that interesting connection. The first mention of Jesus, aside from, the past revelation of chapter 1, this glorified Jesus, the next picture you get of him, would be
A lamb led to slaughter.
Yeah, the middle of chapter 5. Who can take the scroll? And John says, I looked, in the midst of the throne was a lamb as though he had been slain. And he was worthy. But then the elder said, don't worry, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the seed of David. And he looked, I didn't actually say this in the study, but it's kind of interesting because the elder says, don't worry. John's weeping. Who can take the scroll? Don't worry, the lion can. And he turns and he says, then I saw a lamb as though he had been slain.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the lion, but I saw a lamb. Again, such an incomplete perspective.
It is without it.
If you don't have it. And so I would say that you don't know who Jesus is if you don't study the book of Revelation to some degree. Again, without I mean you can even disagree with eschatology. What your perspective is of the end, of how you even read the book of Revelation, but there is a view of Jesus. Even the idea that he's presently in the role of high priest, walking in the midst of the churches, that he's in our midst, that he's evaluating, that he's trimming the wicks and adding oil as necessary. That Jesus is not just in heaven sitting on his keister, but he's active. He's at work in our midst, no doubt through his spirit. So
one thing that I took away, it was probably one of the first segments, and I've thought about it. I jotted it on my phone just so I could remember it, is I know a lot of people that I've grown up with that are like, nope, not interested in it. I don't want to believe in a God that would do that to people. But your study last Sunday made me remember to jot this down. It's not him doing that to us or to humanity. It's humanity choosing that over him.
And that's one of the misconceptions about the entire Great Tribulation and all this judgment that you read. Again, there was when the seventh seal gets opened, when we start getting into the wrath, there was silence in heaven for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's because there was a heaviness on the heart of God. Like, this is not his plan for humanity. This is not what he wants to do, but he's going to do this in much the same way of our lives. Like, God will allow trial and tribulation in our lives to correct us. Like, there are storms of obedience where bad things happen because we live in a fallen planet. And we learn more about Jesus because Jesus did nothing wrong and suffered greatly. So our hearts are more in tune with him, for we have a high priest who can sympathize and understand our weakness. But there are other storms of correction, where we are doing the wrong thing on the wrong path, the wrong trajectory. And God allows a storm to try to open our eyes, to try to woo us, to bring us back. The Great Tribulation, again, I think what's one of the most fascinating things that I've taken from this new study is that you can literally make the argument that the greatest revival in human history, like the greatest number of people turning and giving their life to Jesus in the history of the planet, might very well happen in the midst of the greatest tribulation.
And I agree with that.
So that's what's interesting. And what motivates that? What precipitates that? It's that in the midst of tribulation, people are like, oh my goodness,
God.
what am I doing?
This is really happening.
Yeah, God's allowing hell to seep up here on earth, and I don't want to spend my eternity that way. Like, I still have a choice. I still have a chance, which, I think is very...
It just shows God's love that he actually gives us a choice instead of just making us puppets or anything else.
Yeah, my favorite quote of all time is Norman Geisler, where he said of God that God is not a spiritual rapist.
Yeah.
God does not force his love on anyone. And that hell, in a lot of ways, is the greatest manifestation of God's love, because he's allowing you the choice, the freedom to choose what he doesn't want you to do, to spend eternity without him. which in its most basic definition is what hell is. It's eternal separation from God. So, if you read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, the idea he presents is that if you spend your entire life and you end up in hell, you would feel as though heaven was hell. Like heaven would be a greater hell than hell itself. And the whole book is a group is allowed to take a bus ride from hell to heaven, and they hate it because of all the happiness and all the goodness and all the, however they died, that capacity got sealed, and they don't want goodness. They don't want truth. They don't want the light. They will prefer the darkness. Anyway, interesting. Deal Daddy, you got anything, bud?
No, I've really enjoyed our study through Revelation so far. So now I'm excited to keep going through with it.
Good. Trippy study this past Sunday, wasn't it?
Yes,
No,
it
I
was.
thought that was awesome.
Zombie apocalypse.
Demon. We have demons and these locusts and a million man
Fallen
angel
angels,
army
Nephilim,
Yeah.
killing a third of mankind that I think is an alien invasion.
If you want context for that last thing that he just said, go to c316.tv.
Or go to calvary316.tv/revelation of the king. All of the audio, all the videos in one place, which thank you for the shameless plug.
That's how you do a plug.
That's how you do it.
I agree. I'm very good at this sometimes.
That's good. Creighton, you got anything? I know you've just been behind the keys today.
I got a bunch of stuff going on YouTube.
Really?
Comments. We got comments, but
Wow.
you guys were going, so I was just gonna let
Well,
it
jump
roll.
in the comments. We want these people.
I'm on the I'm looking at the
What
comments.
did they say?
So I just want to shout out some people. We're gonna move quick. Kate is on, and she can't watch the news anymore. Bob is loving this, and I love you, Pastor Bob. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you.
Switch back to Bob. Switch back to Bob.
What do you
Switch
mean
to me so I can talk to
back-
Bob. Switch
Oh
to me.
my gosh! What do you mean
Bob's
switch back
not
to
dead.
Bob?
Bob,
And
you
you
don't
said-
switch back to Bob.
All right, switch back to Bob.
Bob, call me. Reach out to me. Let's grab lunch. It would be great to catch up. I miss you, man.
All right.
Also,
There
go
is
back.
a- oh my goodness.
Kate, I agree with you. It's hard to watch the news for sure. Well, we're going to interact, so we got to acknowledge these things.
All right.
Continue, Craig.
All right. Aaron Hughes sent the prayer hands emoji. I don't know Aaron Hughes. I don't know if you do.
I'm not sure I do. Welcome
He's
to the
friends
show,
with,
Aaron.
he is friends with you and Josh Brown on Facebook.
That time.
I mean, I thought that might help
Well,
nail it
if
down. There's
Aaron's-
only like 4
Switch
people that
back
we
to me.
both
Aaron,
know.
if we're friends on Facebook, we are best friends.
He's lying. Now, this is another one that I'm not 100% sure who it is, but I think someone here might. It is G. Colette Kennedy. And she says,
It's my mother. For everyone that's paying attention. Hey, Mom. I see your boys made it. Look.
Wait, real quick. No, real quick. Switch back over. All right. We think that's cute and all. Derek, you've been on the show twice, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
You've been on the
3
show
times
twice.
technically.
Technically
2
3 times.
on camera.
One time we didn't have a mic and all that set up. You've been on twice and 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
It took 2 times for your mom to give you a shout out. This is the 151st episode of the Outlaw Radio Show. And I have not gotten a shout out from my mom on Facebook or YouTube or anything.
Mm.
Creighton,
your
you
mom
haven't
doesn't
gotten
know
it.
how to work Facebook, and my mom certainly doesn't know how to work Facebook.
Your mom hasn't. Nick, your mom's been eternally disappointed in you anyway.
That's
so.
true. And she doesn't have
Oh,
Facebook.
She does actually say something that's interesting, which is the 4th group, those of us who love God's word, i.e. truth.
Hey, that's
Which is
true.
Which is like
true.
the best way to
That's what I
describe a
felt.
bookworm I've ever heard.
That's why I
That's
felt.
what
I was
Derek
like, I don't
calls
really
them.
fit in with the 3. Like, I get like, flat Earth can't scandals kind of interesting, but I don't like Alex Jones. I was homeschooled, and like death is okay because I know when I die I go to heaven. So like, just all.
All right. Well, I will amend that there's a 4th group of people that Colette and her firstborn fall into, and we are grateful for
It's
that.
just us. It's a lovely
It's just
circle.
literally the 2 of you.
That's not a circle.
It is. It's just the 2 of you. Anyway, that it? That all we got?
Um,
That's great though. We got some feedback.
Yeah, Bob also sent some personal information, which I'm going to take out of the chat when we finish this, but I'm going to let you get first, so that you can get in contact.
Some contact info. Sweet.
We also have a YouTube comment from a Kimberly. I don't know who this is, so I'm not going to say their last name.
No, that's good.
And she said that it seems to her that the Antichrist is being ushered in, which, you know what, might not be wrong. Things are getting weird.
Well, I will say this. I will say this about the Antichrist. Everything that we understand of him. Okay, so if you look back, multiple passages in the book of Daniel, you get to specifically, what is it? Revelation, I think it's 13 and 14. The Antichrist will be a great orator. So that's one of the things, is that he'll be a smooth talker, which tells us unequivocally it can't be Joe Biden. Like, not only that, but he has to live at least 7 more years.
So it can't be Joe Biden.
which also really does limit Joe Biden from being the Antichrist. Not that anybody was actually theorizing that.
No.
But I will say, Kimberly, to be aside from joking, always remember concerning the Antichrist, and Paul writes about this in 1 Thessalonians, that he says the thing that is restraining the appearance of the Antichrist. Because again, you can build the argument that the spirit of Antichrist has been around forever, going back to Nimrod, that there has been a spirit of Antichrist. But what has been restraining the appearance of the Antichrist, not a Antichrist, a little a, but a big A, is, according to what Paul says, the presence and work of the Holy Spirit through the church, which is one of the big reasons that I am personally kind of a pre-tribulational rapture guy, the belief being that the rapture of the church has to take place before the beginning of the tribulational period, because we know that the tribulation, according to Daniel's 70th week prophecy in Daniel 9, will begin with the signing of a false peace between this Antichrist, also known as the man of sin, the son of perdition, the beast, goes by a bunch of names, with the nation of Israel for a period of 7 years. And so at that point, we'll know exactly who it is. But I think as the church, the one thing that's keeping the Antichrist from being the Antichrist is that God still has a work he's wanting to accomplish on the church. Was Hitler an Antichrist? Absolutely. Was he the Antichrist? No, because God still had a plan that he needed to carry forth on the earth. So he was restraining that. Was Napoleon? Was Alexander the Great? Was, you fill in the blank.
Titus Vespasian.
Yeah, you can go back through, Antiochus Epiphanes, who's probably the greatest type. Nebuchadnezzar. You have a lot of Cyrus. You have a lot of instances where you have, this person could have easily fit all the descriptions of the Antichrist. It could have been the Antichrist. But he isn't and wasn't, because God's work here on the earth wasn't complete. And so I do agree with you with just the sentiment that there seems to be things happening. That being said, what is restraining is still very much at work. And that is the fact that there's still the times of the Gentiles. The church age needs to be completed. I believe that in a very literal sense, that in God's foreknowledge, he knows exactly who needs to give their life to Jesus before the rapture, to be included in the bride of Christ, that dispensation. And I don't use that word in its loaded connotation. And that as soon as that one person gives their life to Jesus, that it's done, the work is finished, the trumpet sounds, we're taken home, and dominoes begin to fall into place, of which the Antichrist being revealed is one of them. Again, I would see as being probably the first horseman of the apocalypse, loosed by the first seal. Again, you can read Revelation chapter 6 to get some more insight into that. So thank you for the question or the comment. This is great. This is the whole idea of the show, to get some of this. For sure. And so,
yeah, I think this is going really well.
I do too.
Wonderful.
Well, we are approaching a long time, and so
yeah, I have to work tomorrow,
and so we will go ahead and I'll get a little bit of music dropping in there. Should be starting to fade in. And Derek, you want to say goodbye to your mom?
Yeah. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, everyone else that's listening, watching. My woman, thank you. Good night.
Nick,
Have a good week.
Creighton.
Bye to my future woman.
Come, Lord Jesus, come, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for watching the Outlaw Radio Show. We'll see you guys next Wednesday, 8 o'clock.